Welcome to the 20th Century History series. All podcasts are released under a Creative Commons license and are free for non-commercial use. Each podcast is self-contained and does not require listening to previous episodes. The author is Kim Sonderborg, editor is Philip Bird, and the editor-in-chief is Dr. Liam Brown. All episodes are read by Kim Sonderborg.
Successes and failures of the League of Nations. World War I had a huge impact in all spheres of life in the 20th century. The most important was in international relations between countries. With 10 million dead from the war alone and 20 million more dying from the Spanish flu epidemic following the war, World War I had destroyed an entire generation. The atrocities committed in the trenches of Europe had demonstrated the dark side of industrialization, mechanized mass destruction. The nature of total war left the societies of the warring countries all struggling to return to peacetime economies and a normal way of life. There were many questions to be settled regarding the future of the defeated Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, and their allies, Bulgaria and Turkey. The victors of the war, the USA, Britain and France, faced a range of challenges in settling the situation for the defeated powers, while at the same time trying to restore their own and to restore the European economy. The leaders of the countries, President Woodrow Wilson of the USA, Prime Minister David Lloyd George from Britain, and French Premier Georges Clemenceau, also known as the Big Three, wanted to promote a system by which future war might be avoided or perhaps abolished altogether. The League of Nations became the first international forum for promoting peace and international cooperation in the 20th century. From 1919 to 1946, up to 63 countries held membership of the League, trying to settle disputes and causes of discontent without resorting to war. In this episode, we will investigate the successes and failures of the League of Nations in avoiding war by promoting international cooperation. We will look at the four main goals of the League of Nations and trace the successes and failures in reaching them up through the 1920s and the 1930s. We will consider the factors which either supported or hindered the work for international cooperation, such as the Dawes and Young plans of 1924 and 1929, the Wall Street crash of 1929, and the development of Italian and German fascism as well as Japanese nationalism. First, we investigate the immediate challenges with settling the borders in the aftermath of World War I from 1919 to 1920. Second, we will consider the relative success of the League of Nations during the 1920s. And finally, we will examine the failures of the League in preventing nationalist and fascist expansion in Asia and Europe in the 1930s. The League of Nations was established in 1919 in connection with the creation of the Treaty of Versailles. The short-term aims of the League were to negotiate the European peace treaties and settle territorial disputes after World War I. Long-term aims were to establish a forum for peaceful negotiation between disputing countries, to promote international trade, to promote disarmament, and to improve living conditions around the world. US President Woodrow Wilson had proposed 14 points for promoting international cooperation, in which a League of Nations was point 14. The 14 points included ideas for the abolishment of secret treaties between countries, national self-determination for the peoples of Europe to decide which country they belonged in, and the creation of mandates, a system where stable League members would administer countries or areas of tension for a limited period of time. The mandates were primarily territories of the former empires, such as the Saarland in Germany and Iran, which had been part of the Ottoman Empire. The first issue was settling the peace treaties concerning the former Central Powers. 5 treaties were established. The Treaty of Versailles of 1919 concerning Germany, the 1919 Treaty of Saint-Germain for Austria, the 1919 Treaty of Neuilly regarding Bulgaria, the 1920 Treaty of Trianon with Hungary, and the 1920 Treaty of Sefer with Turkey. The Treaty of Sefer was altered in 1923 with a sixth treaty, the Treaty of Lausanne. Without going into the details of each treaty, the treaties were meant to weaken Germany and prevent it from future war, to make Germany pay heavy reparations, and regarding the other countries, to break up the former Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires while establishing new states on the European continent. Czechoslovakia was created from the former Austrian domains of Bohemia and Moravia, while Dalmatia and Bosnia-Herzegovina went into the new state of Yugoslavia. German East Prussia and Upper Silesia went to Poland, while the city of Danzig in Poland was to be a free city run by the League of Nations. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania on the Russian border were meant to be independent states. In West Germany, Alsace-Lorraine was returned to France, while the German Saarland was to be run as a League of Nations mandate for 15 years. The surrounding Rhineland was to be a demilitarized zone in order to make France feel secure from a future German invasion. The peace treaties radically changed the face of Europe, and while some decisions remained permanent, the division of German Prussia by the so-called Polish Corridor and the existence of a large German minority on the Czechoslovakian side of the border became major causes for Hitler's later wars. The inclusion of Bosnia-Herzegovina into a greater Yugoslavia resulted in large-scale ethnic cleansing in the 1990s when the Yugoslavian communist regime had broken down. From its beginning, the League of Nations had several weak points which made it difficult for it to establish authority and respect. The two most important ones were Wilson's failure to establish support for even joining the League. Without the USA as a member, the League was kept going mainly by Britain and France, who were both struggling to get back on their own feet after the war. The second weakness was the organization of the League. The League's supreme decision-making body, the Council, met only 5 times a year, while the other decision-making body, the Assembly, met only once a year. This made direct response to conflict very difficult. Other weaknesses, the lack of tools for enforcing decisions and the lack of a will to employ a military force, shall be discussed later. As we can see, the League of Nations was created with the short-term aim of negotiating the peace treaties of Europe, and the long-term aims of promoting international peace and cooperation. The initial peace treaties turned out to have long-term negative effects, especially concerning German East Prussia. From its beginning, the League suffered from the absence of the USA, while the organization of the League had flaws. Still, this was the first modern attempt at creating an international forum for negotiation, and as such, a success. The 1920s are usually considered a successful decade for the League of Nations, although several settlements did not work out well. The first challenge came in 1920 when Poland took control over the Lithuanian capital of Vilna, and Lithuania appealed to the League for help. Vilna was Lithuanian, but most of its population was Polish. The League of Nations was paralyzed as neither Britain nor France were prepared to send in troops to force the Poles to withdraw. Basically, the League did nothing. It went better in 1920-21 when Upper Silesia, an industrial area on the border of Germany and Poland, accepted the League's arrangements of a plebiscite in order to decide on how to divide the area. The same happened in 1921 when Sweden and Finland appealed to the League in order to settle disputes over the Åland Islands. The League decided that the Åland Islands should go to Finland, and Sweden accepted the ruling. But in the Corfu incident of 1923, when an Italian general was shot in Greece while on a League mission, and Italian fascist dictator Mussolini took the opportunity to occupy the Greek island of Corfu, the League again failed to enforce a fair ruling. Although the Council of the League was swift in condemning Mussolini's actions, Mussolini managed to make the Conference of Ambassadors side with him. Italy withdrew from Corfu, but Greece was forced to pay a large compensation. A few years later, in 1925, it was Greece who had some soldiers killed by Bulgarian troops, and Greece invaded Bulgaria. The League ordered Greece to pull out and pay compensation to Bulgaria, which they did. but they complained loudly over the different rulings given to Italy in 1923 and Greece itself. Thus, the early 1920s were a mixed success. Many agreements seemed half-hearted, and it was difficult for the League to establish itself. One disarmament conference was held, namely the Washington Conference in 1920-21. Here, the participants agreed to limit the sizes of their navies. The system was called 553. For every 5 British and American ships, Japan would have 3. France and Italy would have the half of Japan, 1.5 ships per 5 British or American ships. As such, it was a success, but no plans were made for reducing land forces, and no significant disarmament took place again. After 1924, the situation became a lot better. During 1923, Germany had experienced hyperinflation as a result of the French invasion of the Ruhr area in 1922. German economy was ruined, industry had stopped, and France and Britain could not get any reparations. In 1924, the USA stepped in, offering the Dawes Plan. Germany was to borrow 800 million gold marks from the USA in order to get the industry and the reparations payments going again. International cooperation immediately improved. In 1925, Germany signed the Locarno Treaties, in which they recognized their borders with France and Belgium. In case any borders were crossed, Britain and Italy would protect France. Given that Germany had now proven itself a country with peaceful intentions, it was invited into the League of Nations in 1926. International cooperation now reached its high point, and this time is also known as the Locarno Honeymoon. In 1928, US Foreign Secretary Kellogg and French Premier Briand constructed the Kellogg-Briand Pact, also known as the Pact of Paris. 65 countries signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact, promising to resolve all international disputes peacefully. In effect, they agreed never to go to war again. In April 1929, the USA organized yet another economic plan for Germany, the Young Plan. This time, Germany was released from 90% of their total reparations. The future seemed brighter than ever. As we can see, the League of Nations experienced mixed success during the 1920s. Arbitrations and decisions from the League rested solely on whether the countries in question decided to follow them or not. Poland did not, Sweden did, Italy did not, Greece did. However, on other aspects of international cooperation, in humanitarian work, the League was quite successful. The League brought home hundreds of thousands of refugees and managed to reduce the use of slavery worldwide. It also established the ILO, the International Labour Organization, and the WHO, the World Health Organization, which have continued to improve the lives of millions to this day. And after 1924, international cooperation became very successful. Germany was allowed to join the League, and in 1928, 65 countries renounced war. But when we look at it, the biggest successes were not due to the League of Nations. They were due to the USA, who was behind both the Dawes Plan and the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Nevertheless, the League of Nations promoted and supported the development, and international relations reached their highest in 1928. In April 1929, a second American plan, the Young Plan, released Germany from paying 90% of its reparations. This happy state of affairs was to be very short-lived, and the 1930s saw the leading countries of the League turning their attention inwards, focusing on rescuing their own crumbling economies and faltering trade. The main reason was the Wall Street crash in October 1929, which caused an economic depression among all America's trade partners. At the same time, nationalism rose in Japan, Italy, and Germany. The League of Nations found it difficult to muster collective action when Japan and Italy began expanding into China and Africa. In 1931, Japan invaded the Chinese province of Manchuria, claiming that Chinese soldiers had blown up a Japanese railway. The League of Nations set up the Lisson Commission, which spent over a year investigating the case. Japan was ordered out of Manchuria, but the Japanese refused. the League was powerless. It discussed economic sanctions, but to keep its own economy going, the USA chose to continue trading with Japan. In 1933, Japan simply left the League. In October 1935, Italy, led by fascist dictator Mussolini, invaded Abyssinia in East Africa. Again, the League was ineffective. Britain and France had signed the Stresa Pact with Italy, creating a united front against the now National Socialist Germany. In 1934, Hitler tried to unite Germany and Austria, but Italy feared a further expansion and joined the Stresa Pact. Britain and France were not ready to give this up. Sanctions were still being discussed in December 1935 when the British and French foreign ministers Poirot and Laval hatched a secret plan to give Italy 2/3 of Abyssinia in return for keeping the Stresa Pact. The public got hold of the Poirot-Laval Pact, and the League of Nations lost confidence among the public and on the international scene. The USA had continued selling oil to Italy, and by May 1936, Italy was in control of Abyssinia. Many historians consider the Poirot-Laval Pact the final blow to the League of Nations, as the two most influential countries, Britain and France, showed themselves ready to sell out a weaker country in order to keep good relations with a strong one, in this case Italy. Collective security had shown itself as just an empty promise. In November 1936, Mussolini gave the League his final verdict by signing a treaty of friendship with Hitler's Germany, creating the Rome-Berlin axis. In 1939, this was transformed into an alliance known as the Pact of Steel. At the same time as Japan, Hitler had withdrawn Germany from the League of Nations. The official cause was the lack of collective disarmament. Germany had been the only country to seriously disarm after World War I. The Treaty of Versailles had forced them to. And at the disarmament conference beginning in 1932, the Germans proposed that all countries disarm to the level of Germany. No agreement was made before January 1933, when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Hitler immediately set out to rearm his country and withdrew Germany from the disarmament conference and the League of Nations. Now all countries began rearming, and basically the conference was a failure. As we can see, the League of Nations faced serious problems in the 1930s. A worldwide economic depression forced attention away from international cooperation and hindered effective trade sanctions against countries who violated the League's principles. This made it possible for very nationalist and fascist nations to expand their territories, as it happened with Japan in the Manchurian crisis of 1931-32 and Italy in the Abyssinian crisis 1935-36. Disarmament became a real challenge as agreements could not be made. When Hitler pulled out Germany from the League and continued open rearmament of Germany in violation of the Treaty of Versailles, the remaining countries saw no alternative but to rearm themselves. Collective security and disarmament had failed. In conclusion, we see that the League of Nations started out with good intentions of collective security, disarmament, and international cooperation. However, most of the League's success would depend completely on its members choosing to accept its decisions. The organizational setup, with the Council and the Assembly meeting as infrequently as they did, hindered effective action in a situation of crisis, and the lack of military backup made it difficult to enforce resolutions. There were many failures, but also some success. Most of the success came in areas of international cooperation, besides arbitration between countries in dispute. Immediately after World War I, the League organized the return of about 400,000 refugees and prisoners of war to their homes. The many commissions of the League successfully improved health and working conditions around the world. The Health Committee, which later became the World Health Organization, WHO, was able to organize global campaigns against distresses such as leprosy, malaria, and the plague. The International Labour Organization, ILO, introduced the 8-hour workday. The Permanent Court of International Justice was open for all countries of the world to either consult with or settle international disputes. Thus, the League of Nations set the tone for later international institutions. In 1946, the League was considered to have lived out its time. A new system, the United Nations, took its place and continued much of the social and humanitarian work begun by the League. In settling international disputes, the UN provide peacekeeping soldiers which are supplied by the member countries. This is the main difference between the UN and the LON. The League of Nations was partly successful, but it was not responsible for the international situation. There were other causes to the demise of international cooperation. France never felt secure next to Germany and made defense agreements with Poland and Czechoslovakia. Italy seemed to always follow its own way, both in Corfu, Abyssinia, and with the Pact of Steel. The USA continued to trade with Japan, and Britain and France were too dependent on Italy supporting an anti-German stance in the Stresa Pact to actually intervene on behalf of Abyssinia. The question is what the League could really have done differently if its own members were not completely dedicated to its aims.
This concludes this episode of the 20th Century Histories Series podcast. Music for the intro and outro was made by Andrea LaRose, while the music in this episode was made by Los Perdidos. To download more of these podcasts or to leave a comment, please visit www.historypodcast.net. Thank you for listening.